Well, in just a couple of weeks, the state capitol is going to look vastly different, at least the people who are there. Some are retiring, others are leaving voluntarily, and some were kind of fired by the voters. One of those who's leaving voluntarily is State Senator Ted Kennedy, Jr., who's with us today. And Senator Kennedy, good to see you here on the program.
Thanks for having me back on the show.
So you have 10 days left. Are you going to miss it, you think?
I am going to miss it. You know, it was a difficult decision for me to make, whether or not I continue in the job that I love, being state senator, or whether I redirect my political activity towards the cause that I've been involved with for over 30 years, which is the cause of disability rights. As you may know, I lost my leg to bone cancer when I was 12 years old, and since that time been really engaged in really what is a civil rights struggle. And unfortunately, the changes in Washington, D.C. that we've seen over the last 2 years really threaten the rights of people with disabilities. And so I can't stand by and watch the erosion of these protections for millions of Americans with disabilities.
There was a lot of talk about this just a couple weeks ago after President George H.W. Bush died,
right,
because he signed that act in 1991, was it?
In 1990, yes.
What still needs to be done?
Well, and I was one of the people who really gave a lot of credit to President Bush for his foresight in passing a sweeping civil rights law. Again, bipartisan. Disability rights has always been a bipartisan issue until very recently. And what we've seen now is whether the recent court decision to undo the Affordable Care Act that will threaten millions of Americans with pre-existing medical conditions, including people with disabilities. We've seen at the Justice Department over 40 lawyers doing Americans with Disabilities Act enforcement, now only 4 attorneys covering the entire United States enforcing the rights of people with disabilities. The list goes on and on. We have special education funding. So if you have a child with a disability in our school system, they're not going to get the same funding that they once did in previous administrations. So we're fighting a multi-pronged battle here. And I'm, as board chair of the American Association of People with Disabilities, I'm helping to organize the national resistance to these harmful changes.
What's your strategy over the next couple of years?
Well, we have a legislative strategy to work with all these different disability rights organizations, from the United Cerebral Palsy to Autism Speaks to Federation for the Blind. The organization I chair is the umbrella group that unites over 70 civil rights organizations for people with disabilities. But another important initiative that I'm involved with now is called the Disability Equality Index. And for the first time, we're actually grading companies based on their disability equality and inclusion. And I'm very proud to say that we have a number of Connecticut employers, including Voya, UTC, the Hartford, Boehringer Ingelheim, Aetna, CVS, Cigna. Many leading employers are actually making a strategic play in expanding the rights of people with disabilities and hiring people with disabilities. But we need other corporations to follow suit.
Connecticut's an old state with a lot of old, archaic buildings, and John Slifka told me a funny story that he now laughs about, but he was trapped in an elevator at the Capitol once, and he uses a wheelchair, and he just said it's an old building, we need to update some things here and there. As you navigated the Capitol and worked in some of these buildings, what did you notice that needs to be changed?
Well, I think, we have an old building in the Capitol, but I think we've actually had a lot of success in eliminating a lot of the architectural barriers, the curb cuts, the elevators, the parking places, et cetera. What the biggest issue are the attitudinal barriers. So still in employment, economic independence for people with disabilities is still very stubborn. People have a lot of biases and misconceptions about what people can and can't do. I want to continue the work. Some of my unfinished business in the legislature was a bill that I championed last year, Senate Bill 384, that called for a data transparency in mental health claims. So unfortunately, we still don't have mental health parity here in the state. And if you have a mental health or addiction condition, you're going to be denied care at a far greater proportion than somebody with a medical or surgical issue. So that's the kind of issue that I'll continue to be involved in. I'm not going anywhere, Dennis. I'm just focusing my efforts in the area where I think I can make the greatest impact.
Governor-elect Ned Lamont, an old friend of yours.
Yeah.
What kind of role do you think you'll be playing in his administration, perhaps helping him? I know that you don't want an official job there, or you've said that.
No, Ned and both Ned and Annie have been friends of Kiki and mine for over 30 years. I think he's bringing a fresh start to our government. He's got a business orientation and mindset, as does Annie. I think they're going to be a dynamic duo and really helping to open up our state for business and bring that kind of orientation that is so desperately needed. But most importantly, Ned is a listener. He knows he doesn't have all the answers to all the problems. And that's the best quality that we can have in a leader, is somebody who is willing to keep an open mind and listen to other people's points of view and get the best ideas from across the political spectrum.
Do you see advising him or working with him in any capacity at all?
Well, I'd love to continue my work in ways that we can expand, obviously, the rights of people with disabilities here in our state, including that bill that I just mentioned related to mental health and addiction services, because we have in the middle of an opioid crisis right now. And we can look at what other states are doing. You know, the states are the experiment, you know, they are the Petri dish, and it is true that the action is all at the state level now. So I think that Governor Lamont is going to have an opportunity to really make Connecticut the #1 state in terms of mental health care in the nation.
You're very passionate about the environment. You represent some beach towns. We don't hear too much about about Long Island Sound these days. 25 years ago, when they introduced those license plates, it was a big deal, but now it's kind of quiet. What's the status right now?
Well, I think it's the keystone environmental asset of our state, Long Island Sound. Not just an environmental asset, it's an economic asset, because it drives so much economic activity for our state. We're fortunate in Connecticut that we have that the environment is a bipartisan issue, and as the chair of the Environment Committee in the Connecticut State Senate, I work together in collaboration with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to reduce plastic pollutions in Long Island Sound, to clean up the water, to address the water issue that we have in our state, to reduce the exposure of toxic pesticides, and the list goes on and on. So I think that's going to be another area where we can build upon the progress that we've made and really hold the line, because we have some trends that are happening in Washington, D.C., as you may know, that want to seek to water down a lot of clean air, clean water laws. And Connecticut needs to hold the line to make sure that we can preserve and protect our environment for generations to come.
State Senator Ted Kennedy, Jr., we thank you so much for being in the program
over
the years, and we'll definitely have you on again.
Thank you,
next
Dennis.
chapter in your life.
Thank you.
When we come back, Steve Jewell will talk about why Democrats did so well this year. We'll also take a look back at one of our first interviews with Dan Malloy. But we first welcome you to comment on today's interviews. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter.